What up, fight fans? This is the new Iman Report, your home for your UFC 249 post-fight show. This will not be the normal spot for the Iman Report. We will normally be on my other secondary channel known as the Iman Report. Tonight, we're going to do it on this channel since my other channel is not allowing me to go live at this point. So welcome. We will be an MMA channel. We will also be a channel for NFL, college football as that gets started later on, hopefully sooner than later. Let me get some things fixed up here. And we'll get started in a minute. But what did you guys think of last night's? What did you guys think of tonight's UFC 249 on a scale of 1 to 10? I would give it a big 10. It was a really good fight card. Really good job by Tony Ferguson. Good job by Justin Gaethje, stunning Tony Ferguson. And that's right. We will no longer be seeing the fight of Ferguson versus Khabib. That fight is now dead in the water for all intents and purposes. As for Tony Ferguson, what is next for him in his career? Ferguson still have a good career. He's still a good fighter, but he might be one of the best fighters now not to fight for gold at this point. What would be next for Tony Ferguson? We'll talk about that in a moment, but Justin Gaethje, give the man his dues. He came with a plan, hit Tony Ferguson hard. Give the man 50 G's. That's going to be fight of the night right there, possibly knockout of the night. Puts an end. Hello, BLN. How's it going? Puts an end to the 12-fight winning streak of Tony Ferguson. So what's next for Justin Gaethje? A title fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov at some point after Ramadan. This should be a really good fight, whether it's on Fight Island or in Russia or in Abu Dhabi. That is possibly the last fight for. The $64,000 question is, will that be the last fight for? Will that be potentially the last fight for Khabib? It's not going to be fighting too much longer, so that's going to be a interesting situation there. But as for Tony Ferguson, no, it's not going to be the end of his career. So we shall see what happens with him. He could go to 170. If he stays at 155, I think a good fight for him could possibly be, I would say, Dustin Poirier, Diamond Dustin Poirier, coming off a loss from Khabib Nurmagomedov. Those two, I think that would be a really good fight pairing. I don't see I don't see Conor McGregor and Tony Ferguson's future at this point, since I think at this point the Conor McGregor ship has kind of sailed at 155. He's focused possibly on a BMF title fight with Jorge Masvidal on Fight Island. That would be a really good fight between those two. So I don't see that in Ferguson's future. So Ferguson likely takes a step back, takes a fight with, I think his best option would be Dustin Poirier, unless he decides to go to 170. But yeah, kiss that streak goodbye. That was a really good fight. That should definitely get fight of the night honors and give the man his 50 G's. The co-main event you had in the co-main event, it was Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. Cejudo just terrorized Dominic Cruz. Cruz was really rusty in this fight, and it showed he had not been in the octagon in 4 years. Yeah, I would have loved to see Khabib versus Ferguson too. That's just unfortunately not going to happen now. But Cruz versus Cejudo, Cruz was really rusty in that fight. He did not look all that great in that fight. So for Cruz, I appreciate him taking the fight on short notice. But at this point, I don't think he should. I don't think he should. I think Cruz's best option at this point is retirement. He had a great career in the UFC, and for the longest time, he was one of the top 135 fighters. But honestly, he just does not have the speed anymore. He didn't look the same since he got beat by Cody Garbrandt, and now I think for Cruz, he's a great commentator, so he can fall back on that. I think retirement is what's best for Dominic Cruz. As for Henry Cejudo, he says he's likely going to retire. The question is, does he stay retired? That's one for the judge. That's one that's up for debate. I think he's holding out for. He's definitely been holding out for more money. He certainly, Henry Cejudo does want to be paid, does want to get that Conor McGregor money, and that has definitely been one thing why I think this ploy to retire for Cejudo is that Triple C wants to be paid, wants to get a big payday, and that's not happened yet. But for Cejudo, I didn't like the fact when his original opponent, Jose Aldo, he handpicked him, and along with last month pre-COVID, between Israel Adesanya and Yoel Romero, those two fighters, Adesanya handpicked that fight, and that one ended up being one of the biggest snoozers in UFC title history. And Cejudo originally picked Jose Aldo, and now after what I've seen on that fight, I do not like the idea of champions being allowed to handpick their opponents. It does injustice to the other top contenders in the division. And if Cejudo certainly does retire, it now is going to get interesting on who fights for the vacant belt at 135. You've got a lot of good fighters at 135 that are up and coming. You've got Peter Yan, who might be a top contender for the vacant belt. You've certainly got Aljamain, the Funkmaster Sterling. He's got a fight scheduled next Saturday night against Corey Sandhagen. If he definitely beats Sandhagen, Aljo versus Peter Yan would be my choice for either an interim belt or a vacant belt, while Triple C negotiates with Dana White to get paid. And I think that's really what Henry Cejudo wants. I really don't think he wants to retire. I think it's more the fact that Cejudo wants that big payday from Dana White. But if Cejudo does stick around, I think the most likely they rebook him with Jose Aldo. That's a real possibility. Or he maybe fights the winner of Sandhagen and Aljamain Sterling. And especially if Aljo wins, Aljo has certainly paid his dues to earn a title shot, especially if he does beat Corey Sandhagen. And then Peter Yan, that kid's got a run going too. Peter Yan would certainly give Triple C a really good fight in the 135 division. So there is no shortage of top contenders at 135, even if, say, Triple C does decide to call it a career. On to the next fight on the fight card. It was Francis Ngannou versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. that was a first round knockout within seconds by Nagano. And for Francis Ngannou, he cemented his spot for a title shot. Whether we'll see what happens with Stipe Miocic. There is rumors going around that Miocic will be stripped of the title belt at heavyweight. Certainly, Miocic wants to get the rubber match settled with DC. I have no objection to that. But you could have Ngannou versus DC. That would be a wonderful fight in itself. And this time around, Francis Ngannou looks like a fighter that is hungry for a title shot. Give the man his title shot, whether he has to wait for it between DC and Miocic, or if it is an interim belt or a vacant belt. The only thing left for Francis Ngannou is for Ngannou next, give him a title shot. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. As for Rozenstruik, he should fall too far down. Certainly, he caught Ngannou at the wrong time. I would, maybe give Rozenstruik a fight between him and Derek Lewis would make a lot of sense. Derek Lewis is not that far down in the rankings. Derek Lewis could be an option, or maybe give him a fight with Cigano, Junior Dos Santos, if you want to go the Joe Silva model of loser versus loser. And I think that fight makes a bit more sense to me. Maybe put Rozenstruik with Junior Dos Santos. That would be a bit of a step down, but not a big step down for Rozenstruik in that one. So Cigano but Rozenstruik, he was just a bit off more than he could chew in that one. Then in the fight before that, we had Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens. That one was a barn burner, with Calvin Kattar knocking out Jeremy Stephens in the second round with elbows and punches. Calvin Kattar certainly looks sharp today. He's definitely looking like a fighter that is going to be who's now going to be in the mix for a title shot at this point after him beating Jeremy Stephens. I think for let me see where Kattar's ranked for the next fight for Calvin Kattar coming up. I think one name that really sticks out for me for Calvin Kattar for his next opponent. Give me one Yair Pantoja Rodriguez. That would be a barn burner between Kattar and Rodriguez. I think they are fairly close to each other in ranking. So this one would certainly be a logical step up for Calvin Kattar. Yeah, they're right next to each other in the ranking. So, yeah, definitely give me Yair Rodriguez versus Calvin Kattar. That should be the next fight for Kattar. That could certainly be a good headliner for a fight night card. Could be a good mid card for a pay-per-view. That one's got barn burner written all over it. As for Jeremy Stephens, I think that is, I don't know, has he lost? How many fights has he lost in a row? As for Stephens, he's lost 4 out of his last 5 fights. So, normally in that situation, I would say he's getting cut, but I don't know. He's still, I think with Stephens, it's more time for Stephens to embrace the gatekeeper role in the UFC. So I think there's still some fights left for Jeremy Stephens. Maybe you stick him against Arnold Allen. Arnold Allen could be an option. Shane Burgos, Ryan Hall. Those are 3 options he can serve as gatekeeper against. But By no means is Jeremy Stevens anymore a contender, but I think he's a good gatekeeper at 145, and maybe he go well. And unfortunately, he did miss weight in this fight too, so he did come up 5 pounds overweight. Does he maybe make another run at 155? He did fight at 155 for a while. But at this point, Stevens is nothing more than a gatekeeper. I just maybe give him Arnold Allen at this point and see what sticks. If have him gatekeep against Arnold Allen and see if Arnold Allen's ready for the next upper epsilon in competition. That's where I'd go on that one. And then the first fight card of the night on the main card, Greg Hardy versus Jorgen De Castro. Greg Hardy was definitely sharp in this fight. Definitely kept Jorgen De Castro on his toes. He looks like a fighter that, maybe he's nothing at first. Maybe he's more than a villain. He's actually looking more and more like an MMA fighter the more he steps into the octagon, as much as I do not like Greg Hardy. I think this was one of his best performances in the octagon, and he showed what he learned from the fight between him and Alexander Volkov. So certainly, I think it's time to reward Greg Hardy with a step up in competition. I think it's time for him to fight a grappler at this point. And we need to see I wonder how Greg Hardy would do against a grappler at this point. Look at it. Let me do a fighter search at this point. But as for who's next for Greg Hardy, I would put him up against a grappler. We really need to see if Greg Hardy can wrestle at this point. All right, here we are. I'm going to found his ranking, so I'm going to see who's. I don't want to give Hardy too much of a leap in competition, but I certainly think he needs now a fighter that can grapple. That is. Who should be next? I think he's definitely going to get a big, maybe Tai Tuivasa. He's lost 4 in a row, but maybe a guy like Tai Tuivasa would be something for Greg Hardy. But I don't know how great Tuivasa's wrestling skills are. I really want to see how Tuivasa does against a grappler, honestly, at this point. I'm trying to find a grappler who's okay. Maybe Marcos Rogerio de Lima could be the next opponent for Greg Hardy. I'll go with Marcos Rogerio de Lima. That's a bit of a step up in competition for him. And go from there. As for Jorgen De Castro, just give him a debutante next time. He's still got a bright future. So yeah, nothing wrong with losing to Greg Hardy, I would say. Now on to the prelim card. In the main part of the prelim card, we had Anthony Pettis beating Donald Cerrone via unanimous decision. This is one I disagree with. I had Donald Cerrone winning that fight. He certainly got robbed by the judges in that one. But as for Donald Cerrone, he didn't get knocked out. He still looks like a fighter who's got plenty of fight left. Probably one of the better fighters that will not win a belt. But he's still got a future in him. So there's certainly some fights for him left in the UFC. Whether it's at 155 or 170. I think a name that leaps out if he decides not to retire is Kevin Lee. I'm surprised those two fighters have not fought in the UFC. And I think it's time for those two paths to cross. Give me Donald Cerrone versus Kevin Lee. That would be a really good fight. As for Anthony Pettis, he's still got a bit of fight left. He's still a serviceable gatekeeper at 155 or 170. Who would I probably put Pettis with next? Look up who I'm going to put Pettis with. I think a good fight for Anthony Pettis might be Raging Al Iaquinta. Iaquinta would be a really good matchup for Anthony Pettis. Those two would be. I'm surprised Pettis has not fought Iaquinta, and that would be a really good matchup. Putting Pettis against Iaquinta, those two are kind of in the gatekeeper territory, and they're both ranked. So I'd say Pettis versus Iaquinta should be next. That one would be a nice fight at 155. Certainly, he could stick around at 170. You can do a little lazy matchmaking, put him up against Vicente Luque. Get to him in a moment here. And then the fight before that, we had Alexei Olenek against Fabricio Verdum. Verdum was certainly rusty in this fight. Who knows where he goes from here? Maybe he fights a debutante next. Maybe he retires. Verdum was certainly not sharp in this fight and definitely looked rusty. As for Olenek, certainly still a ranked fighter. Still a serviceable gatekeeper at the heavyweight division. Let's see who I want to put Olenek up against. All right, Olenek. Maybe put him up against the winner of Walt Harris versus. No, they fought already. Strike that one. Okay, Marcin Tybura seems like a guy that would fit the bill. I think Olenek versus Tybura would be something that would be maybe have Olenek be a gatekeeper against Tybura and see where Tybura's limits are at this point. So that'd be a good test for Tybura. So that Olenek versus Tybura, I'll go with that one. Before that, we had Carla Esparza, who won via split decision over Michelle Watterson. As for, I feel so bad for Michelle Watterson. This is where the UFC needs to create an atomweight division. Michelle Karate Hottie Watterson would certainly be champion if there was a women's 105 division. But she's just such a small body, stuck at fighting at strawweight. But as for Carla Esparza, I'm going to see if these two have fought before I. She fought Tatiana Suarez. No, yeah, she's fought Suarez and lost. Okay. So we're not going to put her against Suarez. Okay, I think maybe a good prospect for Carla Esparza might be Brianna Van Buren. That could be a fight that would be good for Carla Esparza. As I said, you got a feel for Michelle Watterson. She's such a good fighter. She's just too small for 115. Maybe you put her against Marina Rodriguez next. You know, this is one of those fighters where I really wish they did have a 105 women's 105 division, because I like Michelle Watterson. She's just too small, 115. And then before that, you had Vicente Luque versus Nico Price. For Vicente Luque, his next fight should be against, I am going to give him, if he's still fighting, Robbie Lawler. That would be war right there between Robbie Lawler and Vicente Luque. That would be a really good fight. I would love to see that happen in the octagon. As for Nico Price, let's see where he's ranked. You know, Nico Price is just certainly fights with the screw loose. Very entertaining fighter. But he's certainly going to be a good. That's the one thing about Nico Price. He will never fight for the belt, but he will always be a serviceable gatekeeper in the 170 division. Maybe give him a fight against Ishmael Nardiev, since they're fairly close to each other in the rankings. I'll go with that. Nardiev and Nico Price. And then in the early prelims, we had Bryce Mitchell beating Charles Rosa by unanimous decision. As for Bryce Mitchell, it's time to give this kid a step up after dominating Charles Rosa. For Bryce Mitchell, his next fight should be against. I'm giving him a top 50 featherweight. But yeah, he certainly was showcased in that fight and had he pretty much dominated. Charles Rosa in that fight. I think for him, next fight should be against Zubaira Tukhugov. That should be maybe the next fight for him. As for Charles Rosa, Charles Rosa's next fight should be against maybe Derek Minner. I'd go with him if he's. Let me make sure Rosa. How many fights in a row? How many fights has he lost in a row now? Only one fight in a row, so there we go. Derek Minner is next for Charles. Should be next for Charles Rosa or any other bottom feeder at featherweight. Ryan Spann in the first versus fight in the first fight beat Sam Alvey via unanimous decision. What's next for Ryan Spann? I think certainly it's time for him to get a ranked opponent next. Maybe Ryan Spann against Nikita Krylov should be next. That would be a fun fight. Spann starting to look like a good prospect at 205. So I think for Spann, it's time to put him in the deep waters, give him a ranked opponent in Nikita Krylov. That would certainly be, and see if Ryan Spann belongs in the elite class of the 205 division. Certainly, who could use some new blood. So Spann's looking like a prospect. As for Sam Alvey, yeah, I'm sorry. It's time for Sam Alvey to be cut. That's 4 in a row. 4 in a row is usually adios. So go enjoy Bellator or wherever life takes you next. Sam Alvey, 4 in a row is just not going to cut it. And then, of course, the fight that got canceled yesterday was Jacare Souza versus Uriah Hall. Jacare Souza and 3 cornermen tested positive for COVID-19. So that is a little bit of a setback for the UFC, as in trying to get fights going. And now they need to figure out how to change procedures in the coming days before the next fight card on Wednesday between Anthony Smith and Glover Teixeira. So that needs to be addressed in the next few days. And now they got to sanitize the arena. So yeah, COVID. They did a good job for the most part trying to make sure they're testing positive for COVID, but it's still a work in progress. And it's also an indication of what hurdles and speed bumps are going to continue to happen as sports do start resuming across America. We've got NASCAR starting up next week, so we'll see how the COVID testing does. And they got to do a better job, make sure they test before the fighters get to the hotel and make sure they are testing negative before checking in. That way they do not. Unfortunately, all these fighters that fought tonight are likely going to have to quarantine for 14 days when they return to their home facilities and go on medical suspensions and whatnot. So that's the unfortunate thing. Another thing the UFC could do to improve the safety of the announcers, I don't think it's a good idea to have the announcers at the venue right now. Why can't they announce the fights remotely from their homes? What would be the problem with that? I really think there is no purpose of having Joe Rogan coming into the octagon and potentially risking himself for infection by interviewing the fighters. I think there's no need to have the announcers at the venue. Their best bet would be to have them all announce from home or remotely. That would be maybe the better route to go. If you really want to start other things you want to do to start making the UFC safer, and certainly Dana White's going to have to review some of these policies now that you've had a couple cornermen test positive for COVID-19. You had Jacare Souza carrying the virus, and now all these fighters are going to have to quarantine for 14 days before going home. And hopefully this issue is going to be has to be addressed before the next fight on Wednesday. If there is a fight, there's certainly a chance the next 2 fight cards could now be in jeopardy because of COVID-19 and Jacare carrying the virus. So that is certainly one thing in effect. Another thing I did not care for was Donald Trump politicizing it. They really did not need to have Donald Trump promote it tonight. They would have been better off do some social distancing from Donald Trump. I did not like it, especially at a time where Donald Trump and Mike Pence actually need to be quarantining themselves since they've been exposed to the virus at the White House. But no, we did not need the president saying sports. I just felt like he was politicizing it, and that's my 2 cents on that. But we got a good fight card coming up in a few days, so I look forward to UFC Fight Night next week on Wednesday night. So everybody, stay home, stay safe, have a good weekend. God bless you guys. Good night.